She's sitting in a conference room, watching someone 12 years younger get the promotion she wanted. She's not devastated. She's doing the math. 38 years old. Started over twice. And some quiet, stubborn part of her brain is asking the question nobody says out loud, what if I'm just not there yet? Here's what nobody tells you about that question. It might be the most accurate thing she's ever thought. We've built an entire culture around the idea that life runs on a schedule. Graduate by 22. Figure it out by 30. Peak somewhere in your 30s or 40s, and after that, you're just managing the decline. It's everywhere. Forbes 30 under 30, prodigy stories. The tech founder who made his first million before he could legally rent a car. And if you didn't hit those marks, some part of you quietly filed it away as evidence. Evidence that you missed the window. But that timeline was never a law of nature. It was a story, and it's barely even an old one. It's a cultural invention from around the 1950s, when a stable job at 22 and a mortgage by 25 was actually realistic for most people. Psychologist Jeffrey Arnett has a name for what's happened since. He calls it emerging adulthood, the idea that identity formation, the actual psychological work of figuring out who you are now regularly stretches into your late 20s and 30s. Not because people got lazier, because the world got more complicated and the timeline never caught up. So if you're 34 and you still don't feel like you've arrived anywhere, you're probably not behind some invisible curve. You might just be exactly on schedule for a curve nobody told you existed. Psychologists have long drawn a distinction between two kinds of intelligence. Fluid intelligence, the raw, quick processing horsepower, does tend to peak early, often in your 20s. But crystallized intelligence, the kind built from accumulated knowledge, pattern recognition, and judgment, keeps climbing for decades. While researchers like Cattell and Horn established this split, modern lifespan studies have found that vocabulary, strategic thinking, and the ability to read complex situations often don't peak until your 50s or 60s. You're not getting slower, you're getting stocked. And it's not just cognition. Personality itself is still under construction longer than people assume. A landmark meta-analysis by Roberts, Walton, and Vichtbauer tracked how personality traits shift across the adult lifespan and found something researchers now call the maturity principle. Conscientiousness rises. Emotional stability rises. The exact traits that make someone reliable, strategic, and hard to rattle keep strengthening well into midlife. The person you are at 25 is, quite literally, an earlier draft. And this isn't just a comforting theory. It's a structural reality of the modern world. Economist Benjamin Jones studied over a century of major scientific breakthroughs and found something strange. He calls it the burden of knowledge. Imagine trying to become a physicist today. You need thousands of hours just to reach the edge of what's already been discovered before you can add a single original thing to it. A century ago, that edge was much closer to the surface. Genius used to arrive at 25. Now, it usually arrives past 40 because the ladder got taller and nobody moved the starting line. Which means the late bloomer isn't an exception to how development works. They're a demonstration of it. You can usually spot them before it's obvious if you know what to look for. They're the ones who've changed direction 2 or 3 times and still describe it as starting over. When it was never starting over, it was accumulating. They're the ones who feel slightly like a student even in the job they've held for a decade. The ones who were called a late developer by a parent once, not unkindly, without either of them realizing that was a description of a mechanism and not a verdict. Think about what actually happens during those years that look, from the outside, like nothing. The unglamorous ones. The jobs that didn't lead anywhere obvious. The failed business. The years spent raising kids while a former classmate's name kept showing up in industry newsletters. It looks like standing still. It is almost never standing still. Harvard ran a landmark study on adult development for over 80 years, following the same men from college into their 90s. George Vaillant led it for decades, and one of the most consistent findings emerged. What predicted a genuinely successful, fulfilling life at 70 wasn't early achievement. It was the capacity to keep adapting, keep learning, and keep forming real relationships decade after decade. Early success barely showed up as a variable at all. What looks like a slow start is frequently a longer accumulation phase. More failed attempts, more pattern exposure, more versions of the problem seen up close. By the time it finally works, it doesn't work by luck. It works because there's simply more raw material to draw from than the 25-year-old ever had access to. You could call this earned timing. Not talent that arrived late. Capacity that was still being built while everyone assumed the story was already over. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this isn't a fairy tale and it would be dishonest to tell it like one. Not everyone who waits is quietly building. Some people are just waiting. There's a real, documented difference between someone whose slower path is loaded with failed attempts, absorbed feedback, and quietly compounding skill, and someone who has simply avoided the discomfort of trying. The late bloomer effect isn't a guarantee. It's not fate rescuing you on a schedule. It's what happens when unglamorous effort keeps accumulating in the dark long enough that other people mistake it for an overnight arrival. If nothing is accumulating, more time doesn't fix that. It just delays the reckoning. That's the part people leave out when they turn this into a comforting bedtime story. The years have to be doing something. Quietly failing forward counts. Quietly avoiding counts against you. So if the years matter more than the timeline, the obvious question is what the ones who make it are actually doing differently. And it's not what most people expect. Researchers who study career reinvention keep finding the same thing. The people who eventually broke through late didn't sit and wait for clarity to arrive first. They acted their way into a new identity. Small experiments, side projects. Unglamorous repetitions long before there was any external proof it would work. The confidence showed up after the competence, never before it. Which means the anxious feeling you might have right now, the sense that you're behind, that everyone else got a memo you missed, could be the exact emotional signature of someone mid-construction. Not someone who failed to launch, someone who simply hasn't finished building yet. But if you're in it, if you're the one still watching younger people get the rooms you wanted, here's the part worth sitting with. Your nervous system has been collecting data since the day you started paying attention to how the world actually works, not how it was supposed to work. Every version of the plan that didn't survive contact with reality taught your judgment something the plan on paper never could. That is not wasted time. It is crystallizing. Your own life will probably just call it the moment it finally clicked, and quietly forget to mention everything that had to happen first for it to click at all. The people who eventually build the thing that lasts are rarely the ones who peaked the fastest. They're the ones who were still standing, still paying attention, still slightly behind schedule when their actual decade finally arrived. Late bloomers don't bloom late. They just spend longer building roots nobody can see in soil everyone else was too impatient to dig into. And when they finally do open, they don't fall apart in the first storm that hits them. That's the whole point of blooming last.